Drive Elena Martinez stared at the strange readings on her screen and wondered what kind of aliens they were about to meet. The research ship New Dawn had been traveling through deep space for 3 months when they picked up the first signals from an unknown civilization. Captain Jake Sullivan walked over to her station and looked at the data with curious eyes. "What do you think?" Elena Jake asked while scratching his beard. "Are they friendly, or should we be worried?" Elena shrugged and pointed at the patterns on her monitor. "Their communication style is very organized and mathematical, almost like they follow strict rules for everything they say. I have never seen anything like this before." The bridge crew gathered around as the first alien ship appeared on their main screen. It was a perfect silver sphere that moved in straight lines, without any unnecessary turns or curves. "Commander." Lisa Park raised her eyebrows and commented that it looked more like a machine than a living being's creation. "Incoming transmission," announced Communications Officer Ryan Bell from his station. "They want to talk." The main screen flickered and showed 3 tall gray beings with large black eyes. They wore identical white robes and stood in perfect formation. The one in the middle began to speak in a flat voice that showed no emotion. "Greetings, unknown species. We are representatives of the Zephyrian Collective. We speak for 43 member races of our alliance. State your purpose in this sector." Captain Sullivan stepped forward and smiled. "Hello there. I am Captain Jake Sullivan of the human ship New Dawn. We come in peace and hope to learn about your people and share knowledge." The aliens looked at each other with what seemed like confusion. The middle one spoke again. "You display irregular vocal patterns and facial expressions. This suggests mental instability. Are you suffering from neural dysfunction?" Drive Martinez felt puzzled by their question. She had studied alien psychology for years but had never encountered beings who thought emotions were signs of sickness. Engineer Casey Thompson whistled softly while working on a nearby console, and the aliens immediately turned their attention to the sound. "What is that auditory emission?" the lead alien demanded. "Is it a communication signal or a weapon system?" Casey looked up with surprise. "Oh, that. I was just humming while I work. It helps me think better." The 3 aliens stepped backward as if Casey had pointed a gun at them. They began speaking rapidly in their own language before the leader addressed the humans again. "You engage in unauthorized sound production while performing tasks. This is highly irregular behavior. We must scan your neural patterns for dangerous anomalies before anyone could object." A blue light filled the bridge and washed over the entire crew. The alien scanning device made a loud humming noise for several seconds, then suddenly exploded in a shower of sparks. The 3 aliens stumbled backward and their black eyes grew even wider. "Impossible," the leader whispered. "Your mental patterns are completely unregulated. You possess classic cognitive hazards in massive quantities." Drive Martinez tried to understand what they meant. "What exactly are cognitive hazards?" The alien who had remained silent finally spoke. "Thoughts that deviate from approved patterns, creative speculation beyond assigned parameters, emotional responses that exceed safe levels, individual decision-making without collective approval. Your entire species appears to be suffering from acute mental chaos." Teacher Amanda White had been quietly observing the conversation, but now she stepped forward. "Mental chaos? You mean thinking for ourselves and having feelings?" "Precisely," the leader responded. "Such patterns destroyed many civilizations in the past. All member species of our collective have been fitted with neural dampeners to prevent dangerous thinking. We achieved galactic peace through proper mental discipline." Captain Sullivan felt a cold chill run down his spine. "You control your people's thoughts. We regulate them for safety," the alien corrected. "Random thoughts lead to unpredictable actions. Unpredictable actions cause wars and suffering. The Universal Mind Regulation Accords ended thousands of years of conflict by establishing proper mental protocols." Lisa Park shook her head in disbelief. "So none of you can think freely? Freedom is an illusion that causes pain," the second alien stated. "We have eliminated suffering by eliminating its source. Chaotic human thoughts would contaminate our perfect order." Dr. Martinez began to realize the horrible truth. These aliens had given up the very thing that made life worth living. They had traded their souls for artificial peace. The entire galactic civilization was built on mental slavery. "We must report this discovery to the tribunal immediately," the leader announced. "Humans represent the greatest threat to galactic stability we have ever encountered. Your minds are weapons of mass destruction." The alien ship began to back away from the new dawn, while transmitting data to unknown receivers. Captain Sullivan ordered his crew to prepare for whatever might come next, but he knew they were already too late. Humanity had just been declared mentally dangerous by an entire galaxy of beings who had forgotten how to truly live. Alina watched the alien ship disappear into hyperspace and wondered what kind of civilization could survive for thousands of years without a single original thought or creative idea. The answer terrified her more than any weapon ever could. 3 days after the first contact, the space around New Dawn filled with massive alien ships. Captain Jake Sullivan counted at least 50 vessels of different designs, but all painted in the same sterile white color. The largest ship looked like a floating courthouse with towers and geometric patterns covering its hull. "This is High Arbiter Kexthorian of the Galactic Tribunal," a deep voice announced over the communication system. "Human vessel New Dawn, you are ordered to surrender immediately. Your crew will face judgment for violations of Universal Law Section 4.7 through 4.15. Dr. Elena Martinez pulled up the legal codes on her computer but found nothing that made sense. "Jake, these laws seem to be about mental regulation and thought control. How can thinking be illegal?" Before the captain could answer, the alien ships fired some kind of energy beam that disabled the New Dawn's engines and weapons. Blue lights surrounded the human ship, and it began moving toward the massive tribunal vessel. "Against the crew's will, resistance is futile," High Arbiter Kexthorian continued. "You have been charged with possession of unregulated consciousness, conspiracy to commit thought crimes, and harboring mentally hazardous individuals." Communications Officer Ryan Bell shook his head in confusion. "Thought crimes? These aliens have completely lost their minds." "Actually," Commander Lisa Park said while checking her tactical displays, "I think that's exactly the problem. They haven't lost their minds, they gave them away." The New Dawn was pulled into a docking bay filled with security robots and alien guards wearing identical uniforms. The humans were escorted through sterile corridors to a holding area where they waited for hours. Everything in the alien ship was perfectly organized and symmetrical, as if no one had ever had an original idea about decoration or design. High Arbiter Kexthorian finally appeared in their holding cell. He was a tall being with blue skin and no visible mouth who spoke through some kind of mechanical device attached to his throat. His movements were precise and calculated like a computer following programming. "The charges against your species are severe," he began while reading from a crystal tablet. "Evidence collected during initial contact shows multiple violations of mental safety protocols." Engineer Casey Thompson laughed. "Despite their situation, mental safety protocols? You mean like having personalities?" The High Arbiter turned his mechanical gaze toward Casey. "Subject designated Casey Thompson. Recorded violations include unauthorized harmonic thought patterns during work activities. This behavior demonstrates lack of proper mental discipline and poses contamination risk to regulated minds." "I was humming," Casey protested. "Since when is humming illegal?" "Since the Great Mental War of 2,847 cycles ago," Kexthorian replied. "Random sound production indicates uncontrolled neural activity, which can trigger dangerous emotional responses in nearby individuals." Drive Martinez stood up and tried to reason with the alien judge. "Your Honor, we had no knowledge of these laws. Our species developed differently from yours. What you call mental hazards we consider normal human behavior." The High Arbiter accessed another section of his crystal tablet. "Subject designated Amanda White. Recorded violations include systematic mental contamination protocols disguised as educational activities. Evidence shows defendant encouraged developing minds to question established knowledge and create original thoughts." Teacher Amanda White felt her face turn red with anger. "I teach children to think for themselves. That's what education means." Negative, Kexthorian stated. "Proper education involves transfer of approved information patterns. Encouraging questions beyond authorized parameters constitutes mental weapon distribution to minors." The absurdity of the charges continued as the High Arbiter read violation after violation. Drive Martinez's research into alien psychology was labeled unauthorized consciousness analysis. Captain Sullivan's jokes during crew meetings were classified as subversive humor, designed to undermine authority. Even simple conversations about favorite foods or movies were recorded as evidence of cultural chaos spreading. This is insane. Lisa Park finally exploded. You're putting us on trial for being human. High Arbiter Kexthorian paused his reading and fixed his mechanical gaze on her. Subject designated Lisa Park. Recorded violations include emotional outbursts, use of non-approved vocabulary, and public disagreement with lawful authority. These behaviors demonstrate severe mental instability. Every species has the right to think freely, Captain Sullivan argued. It's a basic principle of consciousness. Incorrect, the High Arbiter replied. Freedom of thought is a dangerous delusion that leads to chaos, war, and suffering. The Universal Mind Regulation Accords established proper mental protocols for all civilized beings. Your species represents a clear and present danger to galactic stability. Ryan Bell had been quietly listening, but now he spoke up. So what happens to us? Do you plan to lobotomize the entire human race? The tribunal offers two options, Kexthorian announced. Complete neural modification to bring human consciousness into compliance with galactic standards, or immediate quarantine of your entire species to prevent mental contamination of regulated populations. Dr. Martinez felt her heart sink as she realized the full scope of their situation. The aliens weren't just putting them on trial, they were threatening to destroy human civilization itself. Either they would become mindless drones like the rest of the galaxy, or humanity would be imprisoned. Forever. How long do we have to decide? Captain Sullivan asked. The tribunal will render final judgment in 7 solar cycles, the High Arbiter stated. During this period, your vessel and crew will remain in protective custody. Any attempts to communicate with unregulated minds will result in immediate neural suppression. As the alien guards escorted them to separate cells, Elena Martinez wondered how an entire galaxy had chosen slavery over freedom. The most terrifying part wasn't the trial or even the threat of neural modification. It was the realization that humans might be the only species left in the universe who remembered what it meant to truly think and feel and dream. Communications Officer Ryan Bell discovered something strange about his cell's computer terminal. While most functions were blocked, he found that historical archives were still accessible. The aliens apparently didn't consider old records dangerous enough to restrict. Ryan spent hours reading through files that painted a completely different picture of galactic civilization. Jake, you need to see this, Ryan whispered. When Captain Sullivan was brought to the exercise area, I found archives going back thousands of years. This galaxy used to be amazing. Captain Sullivan listened carefully as Ryan described what he had learned. Before the Universal Mind Regulation Accords, the galaxy was full of diverse cultures, art, music, and incredible scientific discoveries. Each species contributed unique ways of thinking and solving problems. There were universities that brought together minds from dozens of different worlds to share knowledge and create new ideas. What happened? Jake asked while pretending to stretch so the guards wouldn't notice their conversation. Something called the Great Mental War, Ryan replied. About 3,000 years ago, a species called the Vorthik developed the ability to project thoughts directly into other minds. They could make anyone believe anything or feel any emotion they wanted. The story Ryan had uncovered was both fascinating and terrifying. The Vorthik had used their mental powers to turn species against each other, starting wars and conflicts across the entire galaxy. They could make peaceful beings feel murderous rage or convince advanced civilizations to destroy their own technology and knowledge. Elena Martinez joined their quiet discussion during the next exercise period. I've been analyzing the psychological profiles of our guards, she whispered. They show all the classic signs of severe mental suppression. No creativity, no individual personality, no ability to adapt to unexpected situations. The neural dampeners, Ryan continued his explanation. They were supposed to be a temporary solution to stop the Vorthik mental attacks. Every species agreed to have them installed until the war was over. Security Chief Ben Carter had been listening from across the room. Let me guess, he said quietly. Temporary became permanent. Exactly, Ryan nodded. The war ended when the Vorthok were defeated, but the neural dampeners stayed. The leaders claimed they were necessary to prevent future mental wars. Over generations, entire species forgot what it was like to think freely. Elena felt sick as she realized the full horror of the situation. So they gave up everything that makes life worth living because they were afraid of one dangerous species. It gets worse, Ryan added. I found records showing that some aliens have been secretly studying humans for decades. There are references to Project Renaissance and something called the Cognitive Liberation Initiative. Captain Sullivan felt a spark of hope. For the first time since their capture. You mean there are aliens who want to think freely again? Their whispered conversation was interrupted when the cell doors opened, and guards escorted them to a new area of the ship. They were brought before High Arbiter Kexthorian, who stood next to a tall alien woman with silver skin and bright green eyes. Unlike the other aliens, she seemed to have expressions and personality. This is Dr. Vixandra, the High Arbiter announced. She will conduct final psychological evaluations before your trial concludes. When the guards left them alone, Dr. Vixandra's entire demeanor changed. She looked around nervously, then spoke in a quiet voice that showed real emotion. Please forgive the deception, but I had to meet you safely. I am part of a group that has been secretly studying Preaccords history. Elena stepped closer to the alien scientist. You know about the time before neural dampeners. We have learned to partially disable our regulation systems for short periods, Vixandra explained. It is dangerous and painful, but it allows us to experience brief moments of true thought. When we heard about humans, we realized you might be the key to our freedom. The alien doctor revealed that there was an underground network spread across dozens of worlds. Young aliens who questioned the necessity of mental suppression and older ones who remembered fragments of what they had lost. They had been searching for a way to safely remove neural dampeners without triggering another mental war. Your thoughts are not weapons, Vixandra continued. We have monitored human broadcasts for years. Your creativity and emotions are catalysts that help suppressed minds remember how to think independently. The process is gradual and safe. Ben Carter looked skeptical. If that's true, then why are we on trial for thought crimes? Because the tribunal fears change. Above all else, she replied, they would rather maintain their artificial peace than risk any disruption to the current system. But change is coming whether they accept it or not. Dr. Vixandra explained that exposure to human thought patterns had already begun affecting aliens throughout the galaxy. Young beings were removing their neural dampeners and experiencing free thought for the first time. Scientific breakthroughs were happening on worlds that hadn't seen innovation in centuries. The resistance grows stronger every day, she said with something that might have been a smile. But we need your help. Human thoughts don't just break galactic law, they break the chains that have bound us for millennia. Captain Sullivan felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Humanity wasn't just fighting for their own freedom, they might be the key to liberating an entire galaxy from mental slavery. The question was whether they could succeed before the tribunal decided to eliminate the threat forever. Drive Vixandra returned 3 days later with a small device hidden in her medical equipment. This will allow secure communication with our network, she whispered, while pretending to examine Dr. Elena Martinez. But we must be extremely careful, because General Murdoch suspects our activities. Elena took the tiny communicator and hid it in her shoe. That night she made contact with the underground resistance and learned that the movement was much larger than she had imagined. Hundreds of aliens across dozens of worlds were secretly working to understand and replicate human thought patterns. We have been studying your entertainment broadcasts for years, explained a voice that identified itself as Scholar Zixara from the academic world of Kepler. 7. Your stories and music contain patterns that awaken something deep in our suppressed minds. Pilot Nick Rodriguez joined the secret communications during his exercise period. What exactly happens when you disable the neural dampeners, he asked. At first there is pain and confusion, Zixara replied. Our minds are not used to processing unrestricted thoughts. But then comes wonder and joy like nothing we have ever experienced. Colors seem brighter, sounds become music, and we begin to understand what we have lost. Medic Kelly Brooks had been documenting the psychological effects of neural suppression and shared her findings with the Resistance Network. Your people show classic signs of artificial personality disorder, she explained. The dampeners don't just stop dangerous thoughts, they eliminate individuality, creativity, and emotional depth. The underground had developed safe methods for gradually reducing neural suppression. Small groups would gather in secret locations to share stories, ask questions, and engage in creative activities. They called these gatherings awakening sessions, and the effects were remarkable. We have rediscovered art, reported a young alien from the industrial world of Titan Prime. For the first time in my life, I created something beautiful. Instead of just following programmed instructions, I painted a picture of a sunset and cried because it was mine. Engineer Casey Thompson worked with the resistance to establish better communication protocols. We need to be smarter about this, he explained during one of their secret meetings. If General Murdoch catches us, everyone involved will be executed. The humans learned that General Murdoch led the Enforcement Division, a military force dedicated to preventing exactly the kind of mental revolution that was beginning to spread. He had been searching for the source of the cognitive contamination for months and was getting closer to discovering the underground network. Murdoch believes that mental freedom is a disease, Vexandra explained during one of their sessions. He has convinced the tribunal that humans are spreading a dangerous virus that will destroy galactic civilization. Captain Jake Sullivan realized that time was running out. How many people are part of your resistance movement? Active members number in the thousands, Zixara replied. But millions more are beginning to question the necessity of neural regulation. Your trial has become a symbol of the choice between freedom and security. The underground had been documenting the effects of human thought exposure, and the results were encouraging. Aliens who participated in awakening sessions showed increased problem-solving abilities, emotional intelligence, and creative thinking. There were no signs of the destructive mental chaos that the tribunal claimed to prevent. We have artists again, reported another resistance member. Scientists who ask new questions instead of just following established procedures. Teachers who encourage students to think for themselves rather than memorize approved answers. Dr. Martinez developed treatment protocols that allowed safe gradual removal of neural dampening effects. The key is taking it slowly, she explained. Your minds need time to adjust to processing unrestricted thoughts and emotions. But their progress was interrupted when Security Chief Ben Carter detected unusual activity in the ship's monitoring systems. Someone is scanning our communications, he warned. They know we're talking to outside contacts. The next day, General Murdoch arrived at the tribunal station with a fleet of enforcement ships. He was a massive alien with red skin and cold yellow eyes who spoke in harsh commanding tones. High Arbiter, the contamination has spread beyond acceptable levels. We have identified resistance cells on 47 worlds. Dr. Vexandra managed one last secret meeting with the humans. Murdoch has convinced the tribunal to accelerate your trial. They plan to make an example of you to discourage further resistance activities. What about your people? Elena asked. Will they be safe? Many will be captured and subjected to maximum neural suppression, Vexandra replied sadly. But the movement has grown too large to completely eliminate. Your influence has awakened something that cannot be put back to sleep. Teacher Amanda White felt tears in her eyes as she realized what their discovery meant. We've started something we can't control, haven't we? You have given the galaxy its greatest gift, Vexandra replied. The chance to think and feel and dream again. Whatever happens in your trial, you have already changed everything. As enforcement troops began arresting resistance members throughout the galaxy, the humans prepared for their final judgment, knowing that the fate of mental freedom hung in the balance. The galaxy erupted in chaos as news of the human treatment spread through underground networks, faster than the enforcement division could contain it. On dozens of worlds, young aliens were removing their neural dampeners and experiencing free thought for the first time in their lives. The results were immediate and dramatic as centuries of suppressed creativity burst forth like water, breaking through a dam. Lieutenant Commander Paul Stevens watched through the tribunal station's windows as protest ships gathered in space around them. Jake, there must be 50 vessels out there, and more arriving every hour. Captain Sullivan joined him at the observation deck and saw something that amazed him. The alien ships were no longer identical white spheres and triangles. Some had been Painted with bright colors, others showed artistic designs, and several displayed what could only be described as creative modifications. To their basic structures, they're expressing themselves. Dr. Elena Martinez said with wonder in her voice, "For the first time in thousands of years, they're making their ships look different from everyone else's." General Murdoch's response was swift and brutal. Enforcement fleets moved to each affected world with orders to arrest all infected individuals and restore proper neural regulation through forced medical procedures. But his own troops began experiencing problems when they were exposed to the liberated aliens' enthusiasm. And Joy Communications officer Ryan Bell had managed to maintain contact with the Resistance network using equipment he had built from spare parts. "The reports coming in are incredible," he told the other humans during their exercise period. "Worlds that haven't seen innovation in centuries are having scientific breakthroughs every day on the academic planet of Kepler-7. Scholars who had spent lifetimes memorizing approved knowledge were suddenly asking new questions and challenging established theories. Artist colonies were forming on industrial worlds as beings who had never imagined beauty began creating sculptures, paintings, and music. The economic implications alone are staggering," reported Scholar Xara through the secret communication channel. "When people can think creatively, they solve problems faster, develop better technologies, and improve their quality of life in ways the tribunal never anticipated." But the most significant change was happening within the Enforcement Division itself. Troops who had followed orders without question for their entire careers were beginning to experience doubt and moral reasoning. Some refused to arrest peaceful protesters while others actually joined the resistance movements they had been sent to crush. General Murdoch arrived at the tribunal station in a rage that even his neural dampeners couldn't fully suppress. "High Arbiter, the contamination has reached critical levels. Entire systems are declaring independence from tribunal authority." High Arbiter Kexthorian's mechanical voice showed signs of strain. "What are your recommendations, General?" "Complete sterilization of all human mental patterns," Murdoch replied. "We must execute the humans immediately and broadcast their deaths across the galaxy as a warning to other infected individuals." Dr. Vixandra had been working desperately to develop a plan that could save both the humans and the growing freedom movement. She contacted the Resistance through hidden channels and proposed something that had never been attempted before. "We need to coordinate a galaxy-wide broadcast," she explained during a secret meeting with other underground leaders. "If we can share human thoughts and stories simultaneously across all communication networks, we might be able to awaken enough minds to prevent the executions." The plan was dangerous and complex. Resistance members throughout the galaxy would need to take control of communication satellites, planetary broadcast systems, and even military networks at exactly the same time. The risk of discovery was enormous, but the alternative was watching the freedom movement die. With the human crew, engineer Casey Thompson volunteered to help coordinate the technical aspects of the broadcast plan. "We'll need to transmit more than just words," he explained. "We need to share the full range of human experience, emotions, creativity, joy, wonder, and hope." Chief Navigator Sophie Turner had been quietly preparing for this moment by organizing human cultural materials that could be transmitted across the galaxy. "We have music that makes people cry, stories that inspire them to dream, poetry that awakens their hearts, and philosophy that encourages them to question everything." Security Chief Ben Carter took charge of coordinating with Resistance cells that had military access. "The timing has to be perfect," he warned. "If even one major system fails to participate, General Murdoch will shut down the entire network before we can complete the broadcast." Dr. Martinez worked with the underground to identify the most effective human thought patterns for breaking through neural suppression. "Laughter seems to be particularly powerful," she noted. "Children playing games create responses in suppressed minds that even maximum dampening can't completely block." The Resistance network grew bolder as the planned broadcast approached. On the tribunal station itself, guards and technicians were beginning to show signs of independent thinking. Some asked questions about orders they had never questioned before, while others showed curiosity about the humans they were supposed to be guarding. "The movement has reached a tipping point," Vexandra reported. even if the tribunal executes you. The idea of mental freedom has spread too far to be stopped, but General Murdoch was preparing his own final solution. Intelligence reports indicated he was planning to use the execution ceremony as an opportunity to demonstrate a new type of neural weapon that could force entire populations back into compliance. Captain Sullivan gathered his crew for what might be their final meeting. Whatever happens tomorrow, we've given this galaxy something it had forgotten how to value: the right to think freely and choose their own path. As dawn approached on the tribunal station, the humans prepared for their trial, knowing that the fate of galactic freedom would be decided in the next few hours. The trial began at dawn, with representatives from hundreds of worlds watching through live broadcasts. High Arbiter Kexthorian stood before the massive assembly and prepared to read the final judgment against humanity. But at exactly the moment he opened his mouth to speak, the galaxy's communication networks came alive with something unprecedented. Screen every speaker and every broadcast device simultaneously began transmitting human voices, music, laughter, and stories. The Resistance had succeeded in coordinating their galaxy-wide broadcast, and the effect was immediate and overwhelming. Instead of weapons or threats, the transmission carried the most powerful human thoughts of Alkildren's laughter echoed through the sterile halls of the tribunal station. A mother's lullaby played softly in the background while lovers read poetry to each other across the stars. Scientists debated theories with passion and excitement while artists described the joy of creating something beautiful from nothing. General Murdoch tried desperately to shut down the transmission, but the Resistance had taken control of too many systems simultaneously. "Stop this contamination immediately," he screamed at his technicians. "They are destroying galactic order." But it was too late. Across thousands of worlds, neural dampeners began overloading, not from dangerous thoughts, but from the sheer joy and wonder of unrestricted consciousness. Alien beings who had lived their entire lives following programmed responses suddenly remembered what it felt like to hope and dream and imagine better possibilities. High Arbiter Kexthorian stumbled as his own neural regulation system began to fail. For the first time in his adult life, he experienced emotions that weren't filtered through mechanical dampening. Confusion gave way to wonder as he realized how much he had lost. When he accepted mental suppression as normal, "What is happening to me?" he whispered as tears began flowing down his blue face. "I can feel things I have never felt before." Dr. Elena Martinez watched with amazement as aliens throughout the tribunal chamber began showing individual personalities for the first time. Guards dropped their weapons and stared at their hands as if seeing them for the first time. Judges removed their formal robes and began asking questions about justice and freedom that they had never considered before. A feared mental war that the tribunal had worked so hard to prevent never materialized. True creative thought wasn't about domination or destruction. It was about connection and growth, and the shared wonder of conscious beings discovering their universe together. "My people," High Arbiter Kexthorian addressed the assembly in a voice filled with genuine emotion, "we have been living as shadows of ourselves for so long that we forgot what light looked like." General Murdoch made one final attempt to restore order by activating an emergency neural suppression field that was designed to force entire populations back into compliance. But his own troops had been listening to the human broadcast, and many refused to follow orders that would take away their newfound freedom. "Sir, we can't do this," Lieutenant Vexcorin told his commanding officer. "These feelings, these thoughts, they're not weapons, they're what make life worth living." The general's enforcement fleet began standing down as soldiers throughout his command structure chose compassion over blind obedience. Some actually turned their weapons away from the protest ships and toward Murdoch's flagship. In a symbolic gesture of protection, Vexandra led the formation of an emergency council that included both resistance leaders and former tribunal officials who had been awakened by the broadcast. "We need to establish new laws that protect mental freedom while preventing the kind of abuse that caused the original war." The solution came from an unexpected source. Ancient archives revealed that the original Vorthic mental weapons had required forced projection into unwilling minds. Natural thought sharing, like what humans did, was completely different and posed no threat to others who chose not to participate. Kate and Jake Sullivan found himself addressing the Galactic Assembly as they worked to establish what would become known as the New Charter. Freedom isn't the absence of rules, he explained. It's the right to choose your own path while respecting others' right to do the same. The transformation wasn't immediate or complete. Some worlds chose to maintain limited neural regulation while they slowly adjusted to mental freedom. Others embraced complete liberation and experienced rapid cultural and scientific advancement. The key was that each species could make their own choice. Months later, Elena Martinez stood in a garden on the former Tribunal Station, watching alien children play imagination games for the first time in millennia. Their parents wept with joy at seeing true creativity return to their world. After generations of artificial suppression, you did something incredible, Dr. Vixandra said, as she joined Elena in the garden. You didn't conquer us or force us to change. You simply showed us what we could become. The galaxy entered a new age of innovation and cultural exchange, with humans serving not as rulers, but as teachers and inspirers. The greatest victory hadn't been won through superior technology or military might, but through the simple human refusal to stop thinking, dreaming, and believing in better possibilities. Captain Sullivan received reports from exploration teams discovering art galleries on worlds that hadn't seen creativity in centuries. Scientific research stations were making breakthroughs daily, as minds freed from artificial constraints began working together to solve ancient problems. What's next for humanity? Asked scholar Zixara during a celebration ceremony on Kepler 7. Jake smiled and looked up at the stars, where ships from dozens of species traveled freely between worlds, sharing knowledge, stories, and dreams. We keep doing what we've always done. We keep thinking, keep growing, and keep showing everyone else that the universe is big enough for all kinds of minds. The human crime against galactic law had become the galaxy's greatest gift, the restoration of every being's fundamental right to think freely and dream of infinite possibilities. Among the stars,